Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you are watching us. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Smart Elections election protection, and I see Laura there saying greetings to everybody. And my name is Lulu Freistat. I am the executive director and co-founder of Smart Elections, and I am here with our co-host.
I am Benny Smith, and I'm a technical advisor for Smart Election and a state election commissioner from
That's
Tennessee.
right. Benny is the um,
I write code too. That's right.
got a promotion, basically, right? From
Yep.
city commissioner to state commissioner.
I did.
Yeah, very nice. And we are from Smart Elections. Oh, we're going to talk about that later. Um, let's give you a little bit of background about Smart Elections. I hope that you're going to stay with us. This is a very, very interesting program. There was a really I would say, alarming, explosive report that came out on a particular voting machine. It was the Dominion ICX on the version that is used in the state of Georgia. And this was part of a court suit that is a lawsuit that is moving forward in Georgia that is actually asking the court to stop allowing this voting machine to be used for all voters in the state. And as part of that, some researchers got access to the Dominion ICX and were able to research it for 12 weeks. And we have one of those researchers with us tonight, as well as one of the top voting machine experts in the country. And we're really excited. We're going to look at this information in a nonpartisan, non-politicized way. As we do, we're focused on evidence and information here, not political ideology. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us just to learn more about the situation and find out, what we might, what we think about it. So thanks so much to everybody for being here. I see a bunch of our regulars. I see Doug Kellner out there. Hey, Doug, nice to have you with us. Doug is the co-chair of the New York State Democratic Board of Elections. And delightful to have you with us, as well as some other folks here who are very knowledgeable. We always have a really knowledgeable audience, so we love that. And just some quick stuff about us. As I said, this is Smart Elections. We are nonpartisan. And if you want to find out more about us, you're going to go to smartelections.us. And I hope while you're there, you're going to sign up for our mailing list so we can stay in touch with you. You can make a donation, which we'll talk to you about more later. Definitely, we need your support. And you can also send any comments that you have about the forum, if you loved it, if you wanted something else, if you wanted, suggestions for future forums or things that you learned. We love to hear from you. So go ahead and shoot us an email. That's at contact@smartelections.us. And we're going to do quick visual descriptions. These are for people who have visual impairments and cannot see us. So I am a extremely pale woman who doesn't get out in the sun enough. And I have long brown hair, and I'm in front of a brick wall. I'm wearing a tiger eye necklace this evening. Benny?
I am Benny Smith. I am a black male, low haircut with a white shirt, and I look like I'm standing in front of a lava lamp.
Is that your background? That's your lava lamp? Okay.
It just came to me. This look like a lava lamp.
Okay, it's the lava lamp show tonight. And we do have closed captioning available it's on Facebook for those of you who would like to see closed captioning, or you can watch the YouTube replay and get closed captioning there. So I think the next thing that we really want to do is bring on our guests and really dive right into it.
Bring on the guests. Yeah.
So we're going to first have a presentation, and then we'll have some opportunity to ask questions. So I want to bring on Professor Drew Springall. Did I get him on? There you go. Okay. And I'm also going to bring on our other guest, who is Professor Douglas Jones from the University of Iowa.
And take yourself off. So you have to bring yourself back on, Lulu, in order for us to hear you.
Sorry about that.
My
system is being really kind of glitchy tonight. I started out with no audio whatsoever. So at least
you have two vulnerabilities on your computer.
It's time for me to get a new computer. And if somebody wants to make that donation today for a new computer, I welcome you. Smartelections.us, click donate.
Oh, she's selling it now.
I don't know. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna
he's selling it now.
I'm not gonna touch the computer.
Drew, what you put in our computer?
I think you know what it is.
Wasn't me, man. I promise.
I had to put a new microphone in order. Okay, we lost Doug Jones. This is going to
Those
be
are
a
just
really
regular.
exciting technical show.
So I get it. Since we have the authors of the report and all the experts, the technology is going to protest it.
And what that shows you is that technology can be tricky and unreliable, which is basically the overall premise of the show. So the style of the show is really in keeping with the theme of the show. That's as it should be. Okay, so let's see if we can get our guests back in the order that we wanted them. That's great. They're in focus. And what we're going to do first, I think, is, Drew, just give you an opportunity very briefly to talk about kind of how you and the other co-author of the report, which is Professor J. Alex Halderman, sort of what the context of this research was, and then get right into the slides that you sent so we can really kind of look at the report and what the takeaways are from it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, Alex Halderman and myself, well, Alex was involved in the court case for a couple of years prior to any of this equipment, any of this analysis being done. And in September of 2020, the federal district court judge ordered equipment to be turned over. And so we had the opportunity to go in and actually do an evaluation with the court's permission, with perfectly legal evaluation of what the security is of the system. So we started in September of 2020, and the actual analysis, the going through, looking for vulnerabilities, trying to figure out and reverse engineer how the system went on until until July of 2021, where we submitted the report that recently came out to the court. And ever since then, we've been trying to disclose to the vendor, disclose to the locations, and get the report out.
Right, because the judge found the report to be so concerning that she sealed it and did not allow anyone, except my understanding was, I think, attorneys for each side to read the report. Is that correct?
I'm not going to say why the judge did anything, but there was 6 months. We were not allowed to disclose to the vendor until December of 2021. And then in February of 2022, we were allowed to disclose to CISA, which started the CBD process. And then that's what resulted in the CISA ICSC advisory that came out in June of last year, June of 2022.
Okay, and for people who don't know what CISA is, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And what happened, basically, I'm just going to keep translating this for those who aren't following it closely, was there were serious technical and security vulnerabilities that Drew and Alex discovered, and they sent those to CISA, which is a federal agency, and I don't know if it's CISA or CISA. I always say CISA, but that agency confirmed that these are very real vulnerabilities and suggested that they need to be mitigated. They kind of played it down, as the federal agencies tend to do, and said, if things are handled correctly, most of these would be mitigated. But as we all know, there can be problems in the way that security protocols are implemented. So they confirmed that these vulnerabilities exist. So I'd say let's go ahead and get into your presentation and talk about what you and Alex did discover and what your concerns were. And this is about a voting machine called the Dominion ICX, which stands for the ImageCast X. And should I go ahead and pull up your slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's see if I can do that.
While we're doing that, just to be clear, this was a collaborative effort with, Dr. J. Halderman at the University of Michigan, some of the students there for parts of this. So this is not a just me effort. I just want to make that very, very clear. But the we're essentially going to talk about two very, very important vulnerabilities that are known, sets of vulnerabilities that are known to exist in the Dominion ImageCast system. The just like Lulu said, if you're going to the next slide, just to be very clear, put a disclaimer out there. You know, I'm going to be talking about voting systems and vulnerabilities. I'm not going to be talking about outcomes or events related to any specific election or any contest or anything like that. The way, I look at voting security is whether it's, 2020, 2024, 2030, or 2004, it's the same equipment. It's the same evaluation. But if you go on to the next slide, there's essentially three pieces of equipment just to be aware of. Some people use some people use the others. But the first one is the ImageCast X, the ICX, which is primarily used as a BMD system. There are some locations that use it for DRE. There are some locations that use it for VVPAT, but primarily for a BMD. The ImageCast Precinct is the precinct level scanner. Once you print the ballot off of the BMD or fill it out by hand, walk over and stick it in yourself, and it'll scan in and tally there.
So
and
for
then
people who don't know, and for people who don't know what a BMD is, that's a ballot marking device. That's generally a machine that voters with disabilities might want to use, or really anyone who prefers to use a touchscreen can ask to use a ballot marking device. And it's required that we have ballot marking devices in all of our polling places since 2002 throughout the country.
Yes, I believe it was HAVA that required it to be available, but there are some locations like Georgia that went beyond, and Georgia actually requires every in-person voter to use a BMD system. You can't take a piece of paper and fill in the bubbles yourself in the polling place. You can only do that if it's an absentee vote ballot. So, that's why the focus of our analysis was on the actual ICX itself. But we also looked briefly at the ImageCast Precinct, which we did have available. And then the third piece of equipment is the ImageCast Evolution. And it's a hybrid between the two. It's a scanner, but it can also be used as a BMD to mark a ballot. And it's just a different piece of the equipment. And so if you go on to the next.
And I'm just going to keep translating just for people who, may not be familiar. So a BMD, that's a ballot marking device. That's the ImageCast X. The ImageCast Precinct, that's a scanner for people who are filling out their ballots by hand. Georgia does not use those. We use those here in New York, and they're used in other states, those scanners. And then the ImageCast Evolution, that's what's called a hybrid. It's a scanner and a BMD, and we also have those in New York. Is Georgia using the ICE, Drew?
No, Georgia uses only the ICX and the ICP.
Okay, so they're not using the hybrid. Okay, next slide for you.
So, like I said, we're going to talk about two sets of vulnerabilities, one being the actual report, but the other being the DVS order vulnerabilities that we announced a couple of October of last year. And, just to get it out of the way so we can go on to the report, DVS order, if you go on to the next slide, was a vulnerability that was found in the actual ImageCast Precinct and the ImageCast Evolution itself. And this vulnerability could not change an election directly, could not change the outcome. What it was allowed the ballots to be de-anonymized back to the voters. So essentially you're removing ballot secrecy if this could be exploited. And the actual flaw itself behind the DVS order vulnerability was that when ballots are scanned, they're assigned these random looking identifiers. Something to just, if you're going to the next slide, something to just refer to that ballot, because ideally they're supposed to be all anonymous. Well, the problem is these random looking ballot IDs are not really random. They were generated with an algorithm that the approach, it's called a linear congruential generator, but basically we've known that mechanism for generating unpredictable numbers is very, very predictable since the 1970s. And because of that, we can take the ballots themselves and put them in the order that they were cast. Something that should not be able to do, but
you can find the seed.
it's a little bit different from finding the seed, but it's basically because of the way that the numbers are generated in a sequence, it doesn't provide the unpredictableness that would be necessary to shuffle it. And so with the ballot,
my understanding of this, Drew, is that the danger here, and this is for the scanner and the hybrid of that Dominion makes. That's the Dominion ImageCast Precinct and the Dominion ImageCast Evolution, also known as ICE. And I'm sorry about all these terms, but the scanner and the hybrid from Dominion have this capability that if somebody sees the number on the public counter when someone's voting, then that can actually locate your ballot and find out how you voted. Is that correct?
So if you'll go to the next slide, that's exactly what I was going to talk about next. Because once you have the ballots in order, then it becomes
No, I think Drew has frozen, but I'm sure he'll come back. So
somebody don't like this content. Somebody don't like this content. I see what he's saying too. Let's see if he can get back. But he basically saying you can figure the order and you can get back to the voter because you can now you know the time of day, and basically you can put it in a line and figure out the time each ballot was cast and all the way back to the voter.
Right, Alex. Alex Halderman actually emailed me about this, and he said that there's what people may not realize is that on many voting machines, there's what's called a protective counter, and it's
that's the odometer reading.
Yeah, it's there's the protective counter, and there's actually the public counter, and I think maybe it's from this. There's two counters on most machines: one that tells you how many ballots have been scanned on that machine in the life of the machine, and one that tells you how many ballots were scanned like that day in that voting session. Or for early voting, they run it for like 10 days. But it's basically a number when you vote. And what Alex said is that if an election official or another individual or poll worker writes down that number when you vote, they could, through this process, go back later with the data that's available to an election official and actually locate your ballot. And so this is a real concern about privacy.
And I guess we should be.
Bruce Korb here saying, "Oh, clever." Bruce Korb is one of our more knowledgeable computer experts in our membership. It looks like we got Drew back. Okay. Thanks for coming back, Drew.
Welcome back, Drew.
Apparently, it was my turn to
ask you. Are you in your car?
Yep.
Somebody hacked you, man.
No, I was traveling, and the place I'm traveling didn't have as much cell service as I thought it did. So
okay.
But I'm sorry.
All right. Well, we'll get your slide back. We really appreciate you being here, even in the midst of traveling. It's really nice of you. So this is where we left you, and while you were off, we did explain to people because Alex Halderman had emailed me about this vulnerability and basically said that if someone looks at I believe it's the public counter, they could take that number and later associate it with your ballot through the data that's available.
Correct. So since you can order the ballots in the order that they're cast, and because the counter just increments, if you cast your ballot and your voter number 20, and you see your boss, your friend, your coworker, 3 people behind you, you know that they're going to be index number 23. So you can de-anonymize ballots that way. Now, obviously, that takes in-person, being able to view the counter. But you've also got things like the electronic or the poll books. Now, the poll books are not a perfect one-to-one mapping of, the 5th person to sign in is the 5th ballot. But they're a pretty, they're a relative approximation. The 5th person to sign in is going to be, around the 5th person to cast their ballot. And sometimes that's all you need to de-anonymize. The third example here is actually one of the least comfortable, which is some polling locations actually record inside the polling location continuously throughout the voting. And this is a still image from a county in Georgia that was actually FOIA'd where you can see, because the way it's set up, you can watch every person in order put their ballot in, and so you can then tie it to their the actual ordered ballots that way.
Hey Drew, can I make a comment? Like, this is so significant because when we advocate for paper ballots, most of what is being said is the paper ballot is going to inadvertently disclose the order that the voter votes in, which is not true. However, the software gives you the best shot at doing it, right?
So anytime that you put a computer in that process, it allows it to do things that it maybe shouldn't do or wasn't supposed to do,
Correct.
which could compromise ballot secrecy.
Yeah.
So
not always, but
what's the remedy for this, Drew? Is there a solution?
You gotta have a real random number.
If you, on the next slide, it actually talks about that, the problem here is not, we heard a lot when we announced this that, so people shouldn't release data because you can de-anonymize based on the ballot ID.
Thank you.
That's not the problem. That is not the failure here. The failure in this case is just an implementation error. The vendor's documentation clearly states that, these ballots de-anonymize or anonymize the voters from their actual ballots cast. When you can order the ballots and you can order the voters or find approximation for order of the voters, that's the problem. So the failure here is an implementation failure, not an actual procedural failure. But that's just one of the vulnerabilities that have come up in the Dominion systems. In recent
I still am not quite clear because we're using both of these machines here in New York, and I know they're used across many states. That's the Dominion ICE and the Dominion precinct scanner. You're saying that the vendor needs to repair this in the firmware?
Correct. That's the only way to fundamentally patch this vulnerability. Now, there are mitigation steps. We did release a sanitizer tool. There are manual sanitization steps that can remove those IDs that can be used for de-anonymization. But the only way to fix the underlying problem is for the vendor to patch their software.
Yeah, I was very concerned about some of the solutions, such as that the election officials would be sort of cleaning or sanitizing the cast vote records. You really want those cast vote records to be
unaltered.
You don't want anybody
and released.
Yeah, changing those in any way. So that solution actually made me extremely uncomfortable, as you can imagine.
I can understand, but the concern there is there was a way that we could sanitize them where it did not affect the actual usage of them. It only affected whether or not they could be used for de-anonymization. So I agree
I'm
that
leaning
it's not a...
I'm leaning with the firmware. Nationally, what's happening now, what I've seen, and it's I'm going to my next state election commission meeting with the question in hand, is you have these state election boards now saying that the cast vote records are not public records. And I think that they're lightly acknowledging that this flaw exists now without saying it. And that gives them justification to say that the cast votes records shouldn't be public records. But a rule or condition of recertification should be that you have to correct this in the firmware, and then the cast vote record stays a public record.
Drew, my understanding from your report was that this is really limited to the Dominion, the Dominion vendor, as far as you could tell. Am I correct about that?
The Dominion vendor was the only one that we were able to look at directly and find the pattern.
So you don't know.
That is not saying that the others are secure. That is not saying that the others are insecure. It's that the way that that Dominion was generating those numbers had some telltale signs of.
Well, it's at least a whole $100 million that Georgia spent, so that's significant enough.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and
we haven't even gotten to the second half of it yet.
Okay,
we're
going to take a question from one of our viewers here, Julie Weiner, saying, wait, they admit it is de-anonymized, which means it's not private in their documentation, or they deny it and claim that their numbering system disguises the order. I think I might have said that
confusing
In the
me.
reverse.
The vendor's documentation clearly states that on that slide is a quote from one of the manuals that states that those ballot IDs, those record
Are
IDs,
not in the CVS.
are not
Yep.
connected to the voters. They're not connected to voter order in any way.
Okay, so
That's
they're
the
making
incorrect part in the documentation.
okay, they're
Right.
making a promise that they are not actually fulfilling. And I know there is some concern from the State Board of Elections about mitigations that were requested for the Dominion ICE. I don't know the specifics. I don't know if that's about this particular issue or about some other issue. But it looks like there are issues that, at least here in New York, that the State Board of Elections might want to revisit in regard to these two systems. So are we going to move forward with other
Yeah,
parts?
we're gonna get to the second half.
Yeah. So the second half of this is the second half of, and I'll try and run through this as fast as possible. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. But is the report from the actual court that came out 2 weeks ago now, and this is the report that I talked about at the beginning, where it started in September 2020, and then we actually submitted it to the court in July of 2021. And so if you'll jump to slide 12,
Okay.
turns out we found there was an analogous vulnerability in the ICP where the impact is the same of being able to order ballots cast, but doing it through storage order. They were simply being, even if the ballot ID was being generated correctly, they would store the first ballot and then the second ballot and then the third ballot, so it was recoverable. But like I said, the focus of this report was actually on the ImageCast X itself, the ballot marking device, the giant touch screen. And if you'll go to the next slide.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we understand what you're saying here. What you're saying is not only was there a problem with the ballots not being anonymized in their order, the digital ballot images were literally stored one by one in sequential order. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we found on the 5.5A system.
Technically, they have to because it's a FIFO system, right? Drew, like as the ballot is created, you store it, but they need to do something that randomizes it, which they can entirely do.
So you're right; they have to be stored in some way. But storing ballot 1 followed by ballot 2 followed by ballot 3, there are plenty of ways to shuffle the order.
Yeah.
That's well known within computer science that were not being used.
Okay, so I'm just going to, I want to take a couple questions if we have any questions on this particular part before we move on to the next part. So let me just see if we got that question from Julie. I just want to see if there was any particular other questions about this possible privacy violation in some of the Dominion systems. We have this question here from Gina Ironside. Does New York use this machine or is it considered approving it? So I'm just going to speak for the New York machines, Gina. 2 of these machines are in use in New York. That's the scanner and the hybrid. So those are called the Dominion ImageCast Precinct and the Dominion ImageCast Evolution, or ICE. Those are already fully approved and in use in New York, even though, as it turns out, we are seeing they have some problems still. There is another machine that Drew is going to talk about next. That's the Dominion ImageCast X, or ICX, and that's the ballot marking device, and that is not approved yet in New York. And in fact, we are going to encourage you to write a letter to the New York State Board of Elections that they not approve that voting machine. And we actually have a one-click letter ready for you, but we'll wait until Drew gives us more of the information about that, and you can see why we are apprehensive about that. So I think we answered that question. And
so Lulu, if I could jump in just 1 second.
Yeah.
So I just want to be very clear. What we studied was the 5.5A system. That was the only thing we had access to. That was the only thing we had the ability to test or reverse engineer. Yes, version 5.5A. I don't remember the exact system that New York uses. So I can't assert that there are these problems in the New York system because I haven't been able to test that. Now, what I can say is that similar software with similar functionality from the same vendor oftentimes has very similar, if not identical, bugs and vulnerabilities. But I can't. I just want to be very clear. We can't assert one to the other.
I think that's great that you're pointing that out. And I also, what I will say is that the version of that's coming up for use in New York, we actually know is a different version. They've been very clear about that. So just to confuse everybody as much as possible. So in Georgia, they're on the 5.5A. That's the system that Drew and Alex took a look at. In New York, the system that is coming up for approval of the ballot marking device, that's called the ICX, that's the 5.16. So you can see they're different versions, 5.5A and 5.16. And to make it even more confusing, you might think that the 5.5 is a later version, but it's not. The 5.16 is actually the later version. There was something called a fork in the software. So we're trying to be as clear about this as possible.
Yeah, Professor Buell has a good comment. If you could put his up, he said the goal has to be that the ballots are stored in random order, that one cannot replay the election in time in the order of the casting the ballots. That's the main thing. No, it's before that, I think.
Before that, okay.
The goal has to be that ballots are stored.
The goal has to see if I can.
Professor Buell, he's got it. Like this is that's the main thing there.
The ballots are stored in a random order so that one cannot replay the election in time order of the casting of ballots. Right, and
that nails everything that Drew has discussed.
Yeah, he does a better example of putting it in one sentence than I have.
Well, Duncan Buell is a fabulous professor.
Hey, Professor.
We appreciate his years of expertise. And
no, you were good, Drew. You're explaining the detail. He's just summarizing it. I think that'll get you to where you can keep doing your presentation and not have to answer so many questions.
Okay. Oh, I think the questions are good. I'm going to Gina's Ironside. I'm going to need a summary because I haven't captured where the problem of ordering arises.
I saw that comment.
Do you want
I don't think we should try to drill into that. I think maybe we can try to do that later. He's got a full presentation.
Well, we're not going to have time to circle back, I'm sure. So do you want to try to summarize the problem, Drew?
So if you will jump to slide 27, there's a graphic that actually shows it. What the problem is these random looking identifiers are actually a sequence of identifiers that is a predictable. Identifier X is always followed by identifier Y. Identifier Y is always followed by identifier Z, and so on and so on. Now, because that's a sequence and not an unpredictable string of numbers, locating one sequence or one value in that sequence allows you to predict the next and the ones behind you and the ones behind you. So the ballots can be stored or can be recovered the order that they were cast.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to as a seed.
Yeah, what you're saying here is that it's not really random. They're not really being stored in a random order, and therefore someone's privacy could be violated. So I think that's great. Let's move on. And the next we want to talk about the actual vulnerabilities that you found in the ballot marking device, which is known as the Dominion ICX or ImageCast X. And again, it's version 5.5.
Yes. So, the thing to think about with the ICX is it's effectively a really big phone from 2015. It runs Android. It runs applications. It does not have a cell net. As far as we know, it doesn't have an antenna. It doesn't have an RF baseband, anything like that. But that's the way to think about it. If you pull up the slides on number 13, you can think about it a lot like these kiosk machines that you see at a bunch of fast food restaurants. Big screen, you tell it what you want, you hit go, and it prints out your order. So one of the very fundamental ways that the vendor was trying to protect this system is by putting it into this quote unquote kiosk mode, where when the ICX starts up, it immediately launches that app, the voting app, and you can't get to another app. You can't hit the home button. There is no home button to hit. You can't hit the back button. There's no back button to hit. So it tries to put users in a kiosk and lock them in there. Problem being, if anyone can ever navigate away from that app, now
You in the whole
they
system.
can directly interact with Android. And so if you go to the next slide, what we found was there's a multitude of ways to do that. One of these is, unfortunately, you plug in a keyboard and Alt-Tab, and it'll switch to a different app.
Switch to the, yep.
Which, depending on what apps are open and things like that, in Georgia's case, because of a way that they had updated previously, there was always the settings app open in the background. So you could Alt-Tab into the settings app and then close it.
So a remote USB to a keyboard, and you root level.
Mm-hmm. And because of the way that the way that the system is set up, there's a USB cable connecting the printer so it can print your ballot. But with just a $2 USB adapter, you can plug a standard USB Type A connector into. Exactly. Yeah. And so it's this very, very straightforward way of escaping that kiosk mode. If you go to the next slide, another one of the ways that was, that's discussed in the report is through what's called safe mode. Now, like I said,
it's a computer.
Oversimplifying it, you can think of it like a big cell phone. Old Android systems had the ability to reboot into their own or into a separate version of the operating system that disabled a lot of things to try and debug, to try and fix errors. Well, if a voter has access to the power button, there's a way to reboot into that safe mode. So instead of it rebooting and opening up the voting app, it just reboots and straight into Android.
So Drew, this is like a soft and hard reset on a phone.
Similar, yes.
Yeah.
They're similar, yes.
Where you can get the screen to show you the log as it's rolling down. Yeah.
So
similar idea, yes.
Okay, so what I understood, I think, from reading the report also is basically if you could just take that power button and hold it down for kind of an extended period of time, I don't know if it's count of 10 or what, you're going to boot up into safe mode. And at that point, you basically have access to a lot of different settings, including administrative privileges, and you can just start to
everything.
You can just start to install malware at that point. It's pretty much that simple, right?
Well, you're interacting with the Android OS directly. You're no longer interacting through the ICX, the application.
You don't have nothing to do with voting anymore.
Wait, but this is the type of thing that literally like an election worker could do at the beginning of the day. It could, at the, during testing, it's like, that's the type of thing that literally takes very little time. And I know in the report, it said that the power button was sort of behind a panel, but it said that you could just sort of stick like, I don't know, a screwdriver or a long stick or something in there, and you could reboot it into safe mode pretty easily, right?
I would have to refer you to the report on that one.
Okay, that's what I remember is that you could get in there pretty easily.
But in addition to that, this was not something that we found. We were the first to find. That was a customer advisory that came from the vendor, warning customers that potential existed in January of 2020.
So they know about this.
In that case, yes.
Well, what? How is that okay? They know about this and they're just putting it out there and it's okay?
Look, I remember Lollipop so well because it was the first version from a BlackBerry Priv when they launched BlackBerry Priv. Back in 2015, it ran on the Lollipop software. So how many patches? But now there are probably 1,000 security patches since Lollipop came out.
Lollipop was end of life 5 years, many years ago.
Wow.
So they're not even putting out security patches for it anymore.
Oh,
But
wow.
And this is, I'm sorry, so I'm not that up on the Android version. So the Dominion ImageCast X, this ballot marking device that we're talking about, it's running on the Android system called Lollipop.
Yeah.
it's the 5.5A system is running on Android 5.1. Yes, which is called Lollipop.
And which is end of life.
Yes, years ago.
Oh, man.
This is like when ESNS came and tried to sell us a system that was running on Windows 7 software when it was literally end of life. So let me, Kellner is putting some comments up, and let's take.
We on like Android 14 now.
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So let me look at what Doug is saying here. New York has certified Dominion Democracy 4.9, ImageCast Evolution 4.14, and ImageCast Precinct 4.9. Dominion's application pending for New York is for Dominion Democracy 5.16. Okay, so those are the versions, and I'm actually going to screenshot this so that we can look into that in the future in terms of trying to figure out how those parallel with the systems. Those are obviously, or it looks like, behind the 5.5 that you looked at, so would be even less updated, correct? Most likely, Drew, or we're not sure?
The numbering system does not always make sense.
Yeah. Okay.
So
It's supposed to be the minor unit, small bug fix, major unit, big bug fix.
So what we do know is that most likely the foundation of the software and the firmware is similar in these versions, but some of them have been patched or improved in different ways.
Some of them, if I remember correctly, are running Android 8, 8.1, if I remember correctly. But there are differences between the versions.
Is that better or worse, Android 8?
It's better, but it's still old.
Compared to 5.1, it's better.
You still need 7 more to get to modernity.
Okay, and then Doug has another comment for us about the U.S. Election Assistance Commission in Georgia have certified Dominion Democracy Suite 5.17, which apparently has some patches. But what I will say is that Democracy Suite 5.17 is not what is applying for approval here in New York. So in New York, Dominion is applying with the 5.16, which is not certified by the EAC, which, I mean, to be frank, I don't really care about because the EAC approval process is so weak. And I mean,
they're just guidelines anyway.
The EAC approved these other systems that you're looking at with all of these vulnerabilities. But it is just to say that the system that is applying to New York is not officially certified by the EAC. They're coming here with a different version. So for whatever that's worth. So let's move on. You want to move into some of the other vulnerabilities, or we have about 15 minutes here. I want to make sure that we take some questions if people actually have questions for Drew, because this is really a remarkable opportunity from somebody who actually looked at the system and worked on them. There's a lot of wonderful comments, but I'm just seeing if anybody actually has questions for Drew about what we heard so far. I don't think so. Okay,
go for it, Drew.
Forward.
Yeah, so essentially there's a bunch of vulnerabilities that are bad. Things that allow it to disguise what software is running. Things that allow it to change the actual QR codes that are being printed, change the text that's being printed. But we can skip down to slide 19.
You can hang out there. Shoot, that's what we complain about.
but this is what we were just talking about, the differences in 5.17 and 5.16 and the things going on like that. So, 5.17, you're absolutely correct, was certified by EAC, but it doesn't mention any of the vulnerabilities from DBS order. It doesn't mention the vulnerabilities from the CISA advisory, anything like that directly. It doesn't say this was patched by this or this was patched by something else. What it does do is it says things like improve the pseudo random number generator, which
so it's not a traditional change log.
So what you're saying is the 5.17 doesn't even necessarily address the specific weaknesses that the report.
It's not a real change log.
The report discloses.
What I will say is we don't know. Yeah. We have not been, we've tried and talked and talked to the vendor, and offered to help them test, offered to help them do these things. But we do not know to what extent these have been mitigated, or these issues have been patched. Obviously, we can look into the documentation, we can look into the certification artifacts, and see pieces that are tied together. But whether they're correctly implemented, safely implemented, securely implemented, we have to trust the EAC and the Vistals and things like that. And if you go to the next slide on,
I want to say that we had the same experience here, Drew. So we actually did a public records request to the State Board of Elections and asked for the specific modification. They said these problems have been addressed and we feel confident that these aren't problems. And we said, great, we'd like to see that. Please, we did a public records request for those, whatever those changes were that are making the State Board of Elections feel like this system is okay here in New York. And we were denied that public records request. They said that they would not provide it to us. So we have not been able to, have any actual documentation about any of these improvements.
So if you will go to the next slide, I was actually sitting down reading the 5.16 documentations that I could find last night. And there were a couple of interesting things about that certification. One of them, they explicitly, they don't call it out by name or directly, but talking about the randomization, the random ID issue. And when you start really digging into that, I'll just read it. The compensating control is to delete the column of IDs if the report is generated. So to me, that sounds like, don't know whether it's fixed or whether it's a mitigation to work around it. And it's a very, very similar thing with the vulnerabilities from the CISA advisory. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the effort and resources required of an adversary to effectively exploit the device were infeasible within the constraints of the production environment. But when you look into it, it's talking about the documentation of the production environment. It's talking about essentially the manuals, the procedures that the vendor is prescribing.
Yeah, so this patch as in Band-Aid, not patch as correct.
Right. So just to be clear, what we're saying here is that the vendors are saying, basically, it's just too hard for someone to do this. Someone couldn't actually get in there and do it because we have these precautions in place. When in fact, most of us who have done poll watching or poll working or even voted have seen that there are times when voting machines are left unattended. There are times when, the machines have to be moved in and out with, maintenance people and transportation. And I mean, there's a whole series of photos from one of the professors, I think one of the New Jersey professors, where
Andrew Appel, I think.
No, I don't think it was Appel. I think it was Feldman, who would take pictures of himself.
Oh yeah, he was just go and sit in there and take just
year after year, him next to voting machines, just sitting there unattended. So we know that the protocols are not as strict or as as secure as we would like them to be. So just saying like, oh, this could never happen, it's not very satisfying.
There's some merit to saying it's hard to do, but being able to put a USB drive in and basically the front facing screen, you just hit Alt Tab. That's a deal breaker there. That's the reason why the voting village, they just put loading Minecraft on these things, right? Like I might as well teach my daughter how to play Minecraft on a voting machine, because it's the same thing as the other computer she want me to buy. I can get her a Raspberry Pi, or I can get her a Dominion machine and she can play games on it. It's got a bigger screen.
They were playing a lot of different.
They loaded like Miss Pac-Man on these things.
Yeah, at DEF CON they would just play. They would play Pong and they would play different video.
Get it to make me some coffee when I wake up.
Right. So now one thing
the thing about Pac-Man, or another common one is Doom, is it's not about being able to run Doom. It's not about being able to run Pac-Man. It's about
load it.
A demonstration of full control.
I can load it. Yeah.
It's executing installation. It's just a good exercise.
Turn it into a MacBook.
I think it's a good point, Drew. And so really, at the end of the day, what all of these demonstrations are to say is that the election results could be changed. If you could run this malware through these various programs, whether it's by starting the machine into safe mode or connecting a device through the USB cable, from the printer. There's different ways to do it. There's another thing in the report where you talk about remote access, by manipulating the election management system software. Any of these systems, any of these exploits, the end of the day, the goal is to change election results. And what you're saying is that this is quite possible. Is that correct? That's what we're talking about?
It is possible.
Right. We're not
now,
saying
again, the very first disclosure, not
right.
saying it was done, not saying it wasn't done.
Clean it up, Drew. You got your game face on, man. Clean it up.
It is absolutely possible, and we do need better security. We cannot just continue to say this is okay, no one would ever try this, because as Benny is often saying, politics is blood sport. And people are cheating in all kinds of ways. People are cheating through gerrymandering and through the Electoral College and through, pouring tons of money in. If there are all kinds of other ways that people want to tip the scales, why wouldn't we think that they would do this? So
you want to rule this out. That's why I say, Drew, I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to rule it out.
We want to. So what you're saying is that it's possible, right?
Yes. We're the attacks, the proof of concepts, the demonstrations that Professor Halderman and I built are just to show the possibility of something. The way it would show up in the real world is not necessarily exactly what we would build. Different attackers have different objectives, different desires.
Drew, I'm glad you make that point, because that's what I did for Fraction Magic. Like at first, as a developer, I was like, all right, I see a whole bunch of stuff that can happen, but I just felt when nobody going to believe it unless I was actually moving some votes around. And that's just something you don't want to do lightly, because once you do it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
With regard to building,
if you instead of demonstrating, hey, I can change the order, if you wrote a scripted program to change the order and hide the votes around and change the QR codes to start changing votes, you can't put that genie back in the bottle once you do it.
Who says it was in the bottle to begin with?
True, that's true.
No, and that's a very serious point.
I was trying to keep you in your game face, but I appreciate it.
But no, there's nothing special about what we did. This is standard systems. This is standard security.
And that's what I try to explain to people. It's just code doing what I chose to do with it instead of what someone else chose to do with it.
The only difference is we go and tell people, hey, you've got this problem. Let us help you fix it. The actual malicious actors, people that might want to use it for their
they ain't going to say a word.
Political way.
They ain't going to say a word. But pay me, bad guy.
So I'm just trying to put some links in the chat. We're going to wrap up now. And I do want to just do a few things in terms of, before we go, I want to make sure that people can access this information themselves.
We got to have you back, Drew.
So I put the link to the actual report in the chat. It just says link. I'm sorry. I'm on a very limited keyboard right now. So I'm not going to be able to identify these links that clearly, but I want to make sure that you have the links available. There's a really good blog post that Professor Halderman did that really explains this in really very kind of pretty straightforward detail, like just really accessible. And so I want to put that link in there. So that's called Freedom to Tinker. That's a great link to look at. And he also just did a Twitter thread where he walked people through the report in the blog post. So I totally recommend people take a look at those. And I also even just recommend reading the report. I started to read it and I was really surprised at how accessible it was. There's definitely parts that are kind of in Greek and I don't know what they're talking about, but there's also a lot of parts where it's very clear. You could do this. You could reach behind the ballot marking device and there's a cable and it plugs into the printer and it would just take 2 seconds to pull that out and plug a connecting device in, and you would have pre-programmed that device in advance so that all you need is 2 minutes and it runs the malware while you pretend to vote, and the next thing you know, the machine has malware on it. And then it explains how that malware could then be passed from computer to computer and the next thing you know, all of the computers, all of those ballot marking devices in the whole county could be running that malware. And it explains very simply about how an attack on the election management system remotely could actually infect all of the computers in the whole state, because Georgia's running these ballot marking devices across the whole state. So these are very, very simple, straightforward exploits that Alex explains, in the blog. And also, I really encourage you, read the report. It's not as confusing as you would think. It's not as technical as you might think. There's definitely, it's accessible. Any other words on that you want to add there, Drew?
I would honestly, second that opinion. Go read it for yourself. Form your opinions for yourself. If you don't understand something, Wikipedia is wonderful in the world of computer security. It's go read up and understand what a directory traversal vulnerability, what a zip slip vulnerability is. So go read the report. Go decide for yourself, because there's a lot of people interpreting a lot of different ways, and not all of them are technically correct.
Right. And then I also wanted, I put another link in the chat. Dominion, of course, hired a security lab to refute all of this and say none of this is actually possible. And that's from a company called MITRE. And I put the MITRE report in the chat. Now, there was actually pushback against that. There was a letter that came out from, I think, 20 different security experts saying that MITRE report is, I'm going to just be kind of polite and say hogwash. They really didn't think that it was worth the paper it was written on. So this is
they had a MITRE saw.
What do we want to say? Pushback. Pushback. I think I have enough letters to do that. Pushback on MITRE, and that's the link. So if you really want to go through and read all this sort of like back and forth and, make your own opinion. But what I really do want people to do, and this is what we put together. We put together a letter now, and I myself have seen enough to be very uncomfortable that the Dominion ICX, which is the ballot marking device, would be approved for use in the state of New York. I think that it's premature and that the software really needs to be fortified. So this is a letter that we hope you'll write. It's a one-click letter. And so it really only takes you about 2 minutes. And you can send that to the New York State Board of Elections. And it says basically, we hope that you will not approve the Dominion ICX. And one of the reasons why I will say this, we didn't really have time to get into this, but there's a report from the New York State Testing Lab. And this is the lab that the state hired its own lab to investigate the software on the version that we're going to, that they're trying to implement here in New York. And the numbers on this, in terms of the problems with the source code, were very problematic. And I think I have the numbers here in the letter. So yeah, I think I can share my screen here and show you. This is some of the text from the letter that we hope that you will send to the New York State Board of Elections. And it talks about how many actual source code problems were discovered by the New York State Testing Lab. And they were excessive. They were over 50,000 code errors. And there's my mic. I think you can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm still with you. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger. This is directly from the report from NISTEC. NISTEC is the lab that New York State hired to do its own investigation of the Dominion system here in New York. It said numerous issues were found during their review of the Dominion 5.16 source code. And you're able to see that, right? On page 8, the NISTEC report says a list of potential vulnerabilities was produced that showed 16 of high severity, 16 of high severity, and 1,084 of medium severity. In total, 52,877 potential vulnerabilities were identified. it labeled 95% of the source code issues as not exploitable. However, that leaves over 2,500 that are exploitable.
So,
And that was something
so
that Doug Jones, Professor Doug Jones, who I think his bandwidth wouldn't allow him to stay on the line with us, but Doug pointed that out to me. He was like, that's still, he was literally like doing the math, and he was like,
yeah, that's like, well, we can take the car battery out of the car. Just one thing, yeah, but it won't crank now.
Is that concerning, Drew? 25,000 exploitable.
So I did read through that and try to understand what they were talking about. There is unfortunately not enough information to know what that's talking about. So right. I will say it is almost certain that there are not 25,000 separate vulnerabilities in a piece of software. That would just be hilarious. Hilariously,
yeah, you got a whole new version.
It calls
them like Windows 37.
It calls them potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Yes. That's a significant number.
It is a very significant number.
Thank you.
It's from a technical perspective, I just could not understand what they were counting as one or the other. So
right.
Until we get data, I agree that having 50,000 of something is very bad, or
not 50,000 of something, 50,000 potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited. That's not good.
I agree. I'm just saying
but one module could correct 20,000. Like you don't know. Like you can close a port and and eliminate 30,000 vulnerabilities. Like it technically it doesn't translate that way.
Depending on what they are counting.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Like that is not a 50,000 of this number is the same as 5 of this number.
Right. You ain't got 50,000 circuits in it.
It is definitely not something you want to hear, but
yeah.
My understanding from talking to you and to Professor Jones is that those really need to be tracked and mitigated, and that would not be something that we would want to be approving at this level. That really seems like a rather high number of vulnerabilities to just say, we're just going to rubber stamp this.
It is definitely seems to be enough of an outlier to go figure out what is going on, because
and there's even the lab that they turned to try to evaluate that did not agree that they were not exploitable. So one of the other things that it says in the report, they hired this other independent firm called Castellum to try to interpret this, and Castellum disagreed with the classification of the problems as not exploitable. And that firm said they had not experienced such a high rate previously using the same type of tools. So even these companies that the state is hiring have some very serious reservations about this source code from what seems to be in the report.
Yes, I would agree that there's definitely something to look into, something to confirm. I just want to make the point that the possible vulnerabilities is not the same as actual vulnerabilities. It could be, but 50,000 vulnerabilities would be a new DEF CON contest or something.
But it's not good.
No.
It's not good. And there's no reason why we should allow that type of standard to be the norm. Like that we should say, oh, this is fine. This is fine for our voting machines to have 50,000 potential vulnerabilities. That's a very low bar.
Well, Lulu, I sent you a link that I want you to put in the chat. It's basically an archive article of which phones was running Lollipop. It was like the Samsung 4 and the Samsung 5 and 6. Samsung is on like Samsung 23 right now. I think this underscores the point. Like software ages in dog years mixed with jet fuel, right? It doesn't, like we're going to be on an iPhone 90 in about 5 years. Like this, you cannot pace with software if you're going to let your voting equipment sit for 10 years and nothing happens to it.
All right. And we have another comment from Duncan Buell, and this is, I think, a good one also. The testing people admit they only look at 10% of the code. So they found 50,000 potential vulnerabilities in the 10%.
Probably got 50,000 lines of code.
Okay. So I do encourage people to send that letter. I did put the link in the chat. I hope that you can see it there. Did I get that into the chat?
We on Samsung 23.
No. Okay. So the link did not go into the chat. So let me try one more time. And I hope that people will send this letter and ask the New York State to, keep a higher bar. We don't want voting machines that, have this level of vulnerabilities, as well as potentially the vulnerabilities that that Drew and Alex found in the 5.5A system. It's unclear how many of those have been mitigated. So we are very concerned, and we do hope that you'll send the letter to the State Board of Elections, encouraging them not to approve the Dominion ICX here in New York. I think the letter got in that time. And then I saw a comment from Gina, and she was asking, would you be able to email the sample letter to attendees with the New York testing lab results too? Okay, so the New York testing lab results are on the New York website, and it's very easy to find them there and download them for yourself. So these are, this is the page where they post the results. These are New York testing. Go ahead, and there's two that you're looking for there, the two Dominion. They've also tested the clear ballot. We haven't taken a look at that one yet, but take a look at the Dominion. I'll share my screen and you can see which ones you're going to download. I think I can get that a little bit bigger. So here you're looking at these two, this Dominion. That first one is the test lab that's called SLI, even though it's not labeled. And the second one is the NICE-Tech. The NICE-Tech, I think, is a little bit, well, they're both, I've read the NICE-Tech and I found it very interesting. So you have those, you have the link to the one-click letter. I really hope that if you're in New York or out of New York, that you send that letter. One of the things about elections is that state elections can affect national outcomes. We saw that in the midterms. It was 4 of the New York congressional races that contributed to the House changing hands. The Republicans took control because they won 4 congressional races in New York. So New York elections matter. Feel free, even if you live outside of New York, to write that letter to the New York State Board of Elections and let them know that you want for the elections to be more secure. And we're a little bit over, about 10 minutes over. And the only other thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to say goodnight to you, Drew. Thank you so much.
We got to have you back, Drew. I'm going to get your contact information.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love to chat again. Hopefully next time, not inside a car. I'll be in an office somewhere.
Happy to have you anytime. You can come on from your Coyote Ranch, or wherever you are.
Coyote Ranch.
You are welcome to join our forum. We really appreciate you sharing.
Did you have like a random generated location in your head? Coyote Ranch.
Will
you share your slide deck and we can forward that to our mailing list? Is it personal, do you think?
Let me go through and clean and make sure, because we jumped around a little bit.
Right,
see if I can clean it up so it makes sense.
Okay.
So no, there shouldn't be anything confidential in there at all.
Okay. So
I'll clean it up.
Slide deck available up on our website, along with some of these other links, and send that out to the list. Okay, we got one more question here. Angela Mano, has this been recorded? Yeah. Anybody can watch this at the same links that you joined, the Facebook and the YouTube links. You can watch this as many times as you want. You can watch it over and over again because it was a little dense. And then Vanessa is saying, are there alternatives to the Dominion machine that have been applied to the New York State Board of Elections for certification? Not only
the paper
are there alternatives that have applied, there are alternatives that have been approved, are ready to be purchased by the counties. The HART system, which is a scanner and a ballot marking device that are separate. And so they have a hand marked paper ballot option there, along with a ballot marking device for anyone who wants or chooses to use it. That was already approved. We don't know how many vulnerabilities it has, but we can go back and look at the source code on that. My understanding, I don't know. I don't want to say anything because I haven't read the Hart report. I'll go back and read the Hart report. It certainly didn't have the level of concern that that Alex and Drew have brought up about the Dominion ICX in Georgia.
I just want to say, go Vanessa Merton. I grew up on the Merton, but the street I grew up on was Merton. It says, please do not confuse your Google search with a law degree. That is amazing.
Is that Vanessa?
Did you put the comment back up? That was amazing.
Where did she say that?
It's Vanessa Merton.
Yeah.
Just any comment from her. Any comment from her. It's her icon. That was amazing.
Oh, I see. That's her.
Oh man, it's like a gut
Do
punch.
not confuse your Google search with a law degree. Vanessa has a law degree. She is a amazing and brilliant attorney who teaches at Pace University, and
That's amazing.
Amazing mind. So thank you, Vanessa, so much for being here. We got to wrap. We're over.
Right.
I think we covered all the bases. Except for one. Thanks so much, Drew. Really appreciate you being here. And then the one thing that we just do want to touch base with you all before we go is
this is what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like, and democracy takes money.
Go look at Lulu's TED Talk. You don't even pump yourself up. Lulu has an amazing TED Talk. I was floored with it. I mean, she's already good, and y'all didn't see how she yelled at me in the background. But when you watch her present, you know why. Like she's got it. She's a visionary, and it's amazing. It's an amazing TED Talk. I think you should post it with this video.
I will put the link up. I did do a TEDx talk. I am really psyched about it. I think it came out great. I would love to have people watch it. I will put that link up into the chat. And next time, we're always on the fourth Tuesday of the month. So next month, so that's, I think, the fourth Tuesday in July, we will talk about my TEDx talk. And the other kind of exciting thing that happened was there was a New York Times feature story on me.
See there?
Yeah, somewhere between a feature story
Hollywood
and a hit job. But
go Hollywood.
What are you going to do? They got a lot of the facts correct, and they. I thought it was a thoughtful article. It just had a bit of a snide undertone or overtone, which I don't really see that there's any place for that in journalism. So, wasn't my favorite article ever, but I think
it wasn't a hit piece.
It's worth looking at and talking about. We need to talk about how do we keep discussing these issues, which are important, without sort of making everybody worried and freaked out about disinformation and about, the possibility that we're discouraging people from voting. We are not discouraging people from voting. I am going to go vote right now before the polls close at 9:00. We believe in voting. We love voting, but we want it to be secure, accurate, fair, well-administered, and publicly verifiable. And there's a lot more work to be done for that. And that's basically what I talk about in my TEDx talk. So go ahead and listen to the TEDx talk. And next month, we'll play some of it. Maybe we'll play all of it. And we'll talk about that in the New York Times article. And the other thing that we really do need to touch base on is
money.
Money makes the world go round. Money is like love. If you love someone, sometimes you get them a gift. If you love our work and this program and the work that we're doing is meaningful to you, please do make a donation. It is tax deductible. And the easiest way to make a tax deductible donation is on our PayPal account. We have our own 501c3 status now. So when you donate through PayPal, that's the one that has the least the least charges for us, the least fees. So we hope that you will go there. It's tinyurl.com/smartelection.
I need to say something.
Donate now. What?
I need to say something because I'm a state election official now. All the money goes towards the creation of the content. I don't receive any money. This is voluntary work for me. I'm a technical advisor for Smart Elections. I believe in the organization's cause, and I give my time freely. So the people who look at me in the state of Tennessee, I don't need to disclose anything because I don't make anything. Thanks.
Okay. Then I will say that I am on staff, and I am occasionally.
You are. You produce the content.
I'm the executive director, and occasionally
you produce the
I get
content.
Salary, although it has not really happened in the last 2 years, and that really cannot continue.
Yeah.
And so that is one reason that really we implore you to really donate.
Reach in your pockets and give her all your money.
We hope that you will make a donation so that we can continue to do this work. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We got a big fight with the Board of Elections to try to get this information to people and to really make sure that the voting machines are going to be approved.
And we brought you Drew, the co-author of the most talked about report in the country.
Okay, so thank you so much. You can also go to smartelections.us and click on donate. That's another way to do it. And we do hope that you'll just take 2 minutes and do that. And thank you so much. We are immensely grateful for your support. So we hope you're going to join us here next time. And you sign up to attend at smartelections.us. The next forum is July 25th. That's where we're going to talk about TEDx on the New York Times. And now
we're out.
This is what
we did that. This is what democracy looks like. I'm going to find a clip from Mr. Robot for you.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Good night.
Good night.